That afternoon, the first of the disappearances happened. Young Alice Penhallow, 17, walking home from the bakery along the riverside path, never arrived. Her mother called the police at 5. By 7, the entire village was combing the hedgerows and fields, shouting her name. They found her satchel in the grass 50 yards from the bridge, the bread still warm inside. There were no footprints leading away, just a faint damp patch on the stones where she'd last been seen. The search went on until midnight before being called off. Martha didn't join it. She couldn't bring herself to go near the bridge, even for Alice. Instead, she sat by her kitchen window with the curtains open, staring into the fog and feeling the weight of the 2 coins she'd hidden in a jar at the back of a cupboard. When the wind shifted, she could swear she heard footsteps on her gravel path again, slow and steady, circling the house. She didn't move until morning. By the 23rd, the village square was nearly deserted. Shops closed early, lights burned behind curtains all day, and the sound of the river seemed louder somehow, as if the Blackwater was rising to listen. The second disappearance came at noon. A fisherman named Kellen Tregiscus who'd been checking his lobster pots near the mouth of the river. His boat was found drifting, the catch untouched, a single old coin on the seat where he should have been. The date was 1704. Word spread fast, and panic became something harder, meaner. Reverend Cole suggested an exorcism of the bridge, but no one wanted to go near enough to carry it out. That night, Martha dreamed again of Elias Vane. This time, he didn't stand on the bridge. He stood in her kitchen, dripping river water onto the tiles, holding out the noose like an offer. "It's due," he said. When she woke, the smell of wet rope was still in the air. The 24th was a Sunday, though you wouldn't know it. The church bells stayed silent. Reverend Cole had locked the doors. Martha woke before dawn to a noise that was almost, but not quite rain. A soft, constant patter, like coins tumbling in slow motion. When she looked out, the gravel path was empty, but each stone glistened with a wet sheen. She thought about calling her sister in Truro, begging to stay for a few days, but some part of her knew it wouldn't matter. If Elias Vane had carved her name into the bridge, he'd come whether she was a mile away or 100. By midday, the fog had thickened again, and people moved through it like ghosts themselves. At 3 o'clock, it happened. Martha was at the post office when Lorna, the postmistress, froze mid-sentence, eyes fixed on the doorway. Elias stood there, water dripping from the brim of his hat. Without a word, he stepped inside, boots thudding against the wooden floor. He walked straight past Martha, so close she felt the cold radiating from him, and stopped in front of Lorna. Slowly, he opened the little wooden coin box. The sound it made was wrong, deep, metallic, and final. Lorna reached in without protest, as if compelled, and pulled out a single tarnished coin. She turned it over in her palm, looked at Elias, and nodded once. Then she walked out into the fog. No one followed her. The box snapped shut, and Elias was gone. Lorna never came back. That night, the village broke. You could hear it in the way the wind rattled loose shutters and in the way no one lit their windows anymore. Candles were for the hopeful, and hope was gone. A small group of men, led by Kellen's brother, tried to set fire to the bridge. They didn't make it past the first stone before the fog rolled in thick as wool, and they scattered like frightened animals. One came back with burns on his hands he couldn't explain. Another was found the next morning lying on his kitchen floor, eyes open and empty. Martha didn't sleep at all. She sat at her kitchen table, the jar with the 2 coins in front of her. Every so often, she thought she heard the faint clink of more coins inside, though she hadn't added any. Around 2 a.m., she caught herself wondering, really wondering, what would happen if she just left them on her doorstep, like an offering. But she remembered the names carved into the bridge. Payment didn't save anyone. It only marked the debt as collected. On the morning of the 25th, Martha made a decision. She would go to the bridge, not to cross it, but to see if there was a way to remove her name from the stone. She took a chisel from her father's old toolbox and wrapped it in a rag. The fog was lighter, and for the first time in days, she could hear gulls over the river. But when she reached the bridge, her stomach dropped. There were more names now. Fresh ones. Not just hers. Half the village was there, each followed by an empty space where a date would one day be carved. On the 28th, Martha stopped being afraid. Fear had become useless, a numb, repetitive thing that only made her slower. She lit every lamp in the cottage, laid the chisel on the kitchen table, and wrote a note in neat block letters. "If I'm not back by morning, don't follow me." She left it under a mug, took the coin from her pocket, and walked to the bridge. The fog parted for her this time, curling away from her legs like smoke from a snuffed candle. In the center of the bridge, she placed the coin in her palm and called his name. Quietly at first, then louder, until the sound echoed out across the water. Somewhere in the fog, footsteps began to approach, slow and deliberate, each one ringing against the stone like a hammer on metal. When he stepped into view, Elias Vane was smiling, though his eyes were as empty as the coins he carried. Behind him, the shapes from her garden gathered, filling the bridge from rail to rail. "You've brought payment," he said in a voice like wet rope snapping. "Now let's settle the debt." The rain had stopped an hour before midnight, but the bridge still gleamed black in the weak moonlight, slick with runoff and something thicker that glistened like oil. Ethan's boots made a sound, half splash, half suck, each time he stepped forward. His flashlight was dead. The batteries had been fresh when he'd left the cottage, but somewhere between the last farmhouse and the first sight of Blackwater Bridge, the beam had flickered and choked out, as though swallowed by the same darkness that seemed to hang over the river like a living thing that he wasn't alone. He knew it in his bones. The air had weight. Every breath he took felt like pulling cold syrup into his lungs. Somewhere beneath the creak of the bridge's old timbers and the whisper of the current below, there was another sound, faint, rhythmic, like coins being sifted through skeletal fingers. "Vane," Ethan whispered into the dark. His voice was too small here, the name of the tollkeeper a moth against the black glass of the night. "I know what you are. I know what you did." Silence. Then the smallest answer, just beyond the far arch, a voice like a blade sliding across wet stone. "Pay. The toll." The shadow formed before Ethan's eyes could tell him where it began. One moment there was nothing but moonlight slivering through mist. The next there was a man in a long, sodden coat, tricorn hat sagging with centuries of rain. The face beneath was half hidden, but what could be seen was wrong. Skin stretched too thin over bone, a jaw that opened too wide, and eyes like coins freshly dug from the riverbed. "You've taken enough," Ethan said, forcing steel into his voice. His left hand gripped the thing he'd carried all the way from Whitby. An iron key, older than the bridge, dug from the abbey ruins where Vane had been cursed. "You get no more." Vane tilted his head, as though considering. His smile was a wound in the dark. "One every 50 years, he murmured. "A small price for the crossing. Tonight, it is due." Ethan stepped forward, the boards groaning under his weight. He felt the river below like a waiting mouth. "Then take me," he said. "But you don't get another after me. Ever." Ethan's breath came slow, fogging in the cold air, and for a heartbeat the whole world seemed to hold still. No wind in the reeds, no creak from the bridge, no lap of the river below. Only Vane's pale, coin-bright eyes watching him. Somewhere deep in Ethan's chest, an old fear stirred. The kind that didn't come from stories or shadows, but from the knowledge that this moment was bigger than him, older than the stones beneath his feet. It was the kind of fear that whispered, "You are trespassing in something else's time." The iron key burned in his grip, and for a mad instant, he thought he could hear the voices of all the tollkeeper's victims. Hundreds of them, crying out from the black water below. Not screams, but pleading, desperate murmurs that pulled at him, urging him to finish what he'd come here to do. The tollkeeper of Blackwater Bridge, Part 1-inch Cornwall, where the fog hangs low like a sleeping giant's breath and the sea gnaws at the cliffs with a patient, toothy hunger, there is a bridge few speak of and even fewer dare to cross at night. Blackwater Bridge squats over a thin, dark river that runs like a vein through the valley, the kind of water that looks oily even under sunlight. The locals, those few old enough to remember or stubborn enough to stay, say it was built in the late 1600s, stones hauled from a quarry 2 miles away by sweating men with thick hands and thinner tempers. Its arch is high and cruel, the kind that makes you feel watched as you cross, as if the bridge itself is taking stock of you, measuring your worth. Children are told to stay away, though not for fear of falling in. The story goes that there was once a man named Elias Vane, the tollkeeper, who took coin from travelers making their way between Penzance and the inland villages. But coin, as the story tells it, was never enough for Elias. Some folks say he was a failed fisherman turned thief. Others whisper about darker trades, muttering that he made pacts with things that live in the marshes or the deep folds of the forest. The one fact that can be agreed upon is that in 1731, Elias was caught robbing, and some say murdering, a wealthy wool merchant and his wife. He was hanged from a gallows erected at the bridge's mouth, his body left for 3 days as a warning. They say on the third night, the body vanished, leaving behind only the noose swaying in the cold wind, and a black stain on the stones where his feet had dangled. Since then, every 50 years, right to the night, someone dies on the bridge. Not a fall, not a drowning. Just dead, as if the life had been scooped out with invisible hands. In the pubs of the surrounding villages, the Crown Gull in Marazion, the Fisherman's Rest in Porthleven, you can still hear old-timers count back the years. It's been near 50, they'll murmur, eyes sliding toward the window as though expecting to see a figure in a tattered tricorn hat waiting in the mist. This autumn makes it exactly 294 years since Elias Vane swung in the fog, and the river is running darker than anyone can remember. Tourists are fewer now. The Bridges Road is a backwater thing, bypassed by the new motorway. But the locals know the date is coming. They feel it in the bite of the wind, in the sudden silences that fall on the lanes when the fog rolls in. Some pretend they don't care, that such things are for ghost books and Halloween chatter, but the truth is, as the calendar ticks closer, every eye that meets yours carries the same unspoken question. Who will the tollkeeper take this time? Martha Penryn hated the bridge. Always had. She'd grown up in a cottage less than a mile from it, and some of her earliest memories were of her mother clutching her hand tight while they crossed, muttering under her breath like she was counting something. Even as a child, Martha sensed the way the air changed on Blackwater Bridge. It felt thicker, as though the space you walked through was filled with unseen fingers brushing against you. In her teens, she dared herself to cross alone after sundown, laughing at her own pounding heartbeat, only to come home pale and unable to explain why she'd felt watched every step of the way. Now, at 32, divorced and back in her childhood home after a failed stint in Truro, she avoided it entirely, even if it meant adding 20 minutes to her errands. But on the second Friday of October, Martha found herself behind the wheel of her battered Ford Fiesta, headlights slicing through a damp dusk, and the quickest way home was over Blackwater Bridge. She told herself it was fine. The windscreen wipers beat in a steady rhythm, and the fog pressed close, swallowing the hedgerows on either side. She could barely see the river when she rolled onto the bridge's hump. Then, halfway across, the car shuddered, just a brief cough, like it had swallowed something wrong, and the radio went dead. No music, no static. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Martha's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She wasn't superstitious, but she'd heard enough talk in the village to know that Elias Vane's year was coming up. Her eyes flicked to the passenger side, almost against her will, and for a split second, just the length of a blink, she thought she saw a man in the seat. A man in a dark coat, head tilted, grinning with too many teeth. The car jolted forward like something had pushed it, and then she was off the bridge, taillights vanishing into the mist. The next morning, the village was buzzing, not in the loud, gossipy way it did when someone's cousin was caught drunk at the pub, but in the low, murmured way that meant something was wrong. Old Mrs. Tregear, who ran the bakery, swore she'd heard knocking at her window at 3 a.m. Like Knuckles, she told anyone who'd listen. 3 raps, then quiet, then 3 again. I pulled the curtains and there was nothing there but fog. In the post office, the talk was of livestock. 2 sheep found dead in a field near the river, their eyes wide and mouths frozen mid-bleat. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just gone, like something had turned them off. And then there was Henry Polmar, a retired schoolteacher who lived alone in a stone house overlooking the valley. Henry was seen in the village green, standing by the war memorial and staring at the bridge for over an hour. When asked if he was all right, he'd only said, "He's walking again," before shuffling off toward home. No one had to ask who he was. That night, Martha couldn't sleep. The memory of that brief, impossible grin in her passenger seat played on a loop behind her eyes. She told herself it had been a trick of the fog, her tired brain filling in shapes where there were none. But when she went to make tea at 2 a.m, she noticed something on her kitchen table. An old coin, tarnished green, stamped with the year 1729. She didn't own it. She didn't know how it had gotten there. And when she picked it up, it was cold. So cold it burned, by the second week of October. The fog was no longer a passing visitor, but a resident. It rolled in from the coast and settled like it owned the place, curling around chimney stacks and creeping under door frames. The road over Blackwater Bridge seemed narrower in it, the stones darker, the river below a whispering thing. People began lighting candles in their windows at night, an old Cornish habit meant to keep the dead from losing their way, or from finding yours. But the candles didn't seem to help. There were reports of footsteps outside houses with no one there, and of doors swelling in their frames as if pressed on from the outside. Reverend Cole held a special prayer meeting in the church, though even he admitted it was more for morale than for miracles. On the night of the 15th, Henry Polmar was found dead on the bridge. No wounds, no struggle. Just lying there on the wet stone, eyes wide, lips parted like he'd been about to speak. The coroner listed it as heart failure. But Martha knew better. Everyone did. She saw the way people glanced at the calendar, then at the bridge. Henry's death was 2 weeks early. The tollkeeper had never been early before. And in her gut, Martha felt the wrongness of it like a stone in her stomach. If the pattern had broken, it meant one thing. Elias Vane wasn't waiting for his 50 years to the day. This time, he was hungry the police didn't close the bridge after Henry Palmer's death. They should have. Martha thought so, anyway. But the Blackwater Road was still technically public property, and besides, Cornwall Constabulary wasn't in the habit of entertaining old ghost stories. Natural causes, the report had said, though Martha overheard Sergeant Biggs in the shop muttering to his partner about the expression on Henry's face. Not shock. Not fear. Something else. Something worse. Martha tried to stay away from the bridge, but it was as if her errands kept pulling her toward it. Once, she caught herself taking the long way back from the grocer's, only to end up parked on the levee 20 yards from the hump, headlights cutting through the mist. She told herself she was looking for something, some logical explanation, but the truth was harder to swallow. She felt watched, even from this distance. That night, she dreamed of Elias Vane. She'd never seen a picture of him, but in the dream, she knew it was him the way you know a smell belongs to a childhood kitchen or a sound belongs to a certain season. He stood in the middle of the bridge, coat soaked with rain, tricorn hat tilted just enough to shadow his eyes. In one hand, he held a noose. In the other, a coin. "Your toll," he said, voice like wet rope. She woke with the taste of river water in her mouth and the sound of dripping in her ears. Though the room was Dr. wide up by the 18th, the village was fraying. People locked their doors before sunset, though no one could quite explain why. The postman stopped delivering to the cottages near the river, claiming his van wouldn't start once he got within half a mile. The fog grew thicker, heavy with a sour, metallic smell that clung to clothes and hair. 3 more livestock deaths were reported. 2 cows and a goat. All found near the bridge, their bodies unmarked but their eyes wrong. Glazed like old glass. Reverend Cole's voice shook during his Sunday sermon, and Martha noticed he'd moved his own bed into the church vestry. Part 3 by the 26th, the air itself felt wrong. Heavy. Saltless. Even the sea, just a mile away, seemed to have retreated from the shore, leaving a black strip of exposed sand slick as oil. People spoke less now, as though words might draw his attention. Martha stayed in her cottage with the curtains drawn, the chisel lying on the table beside her like a talisman she wasn't sure how to use. The coins in the jar had multiplied. She hadn't counted them, but the weight was different when she lifted it, heavier in a way that seemed to pull at her arms. That afternoon, she heard the first screams. 2 voices at once, high and short, cutting through the fog like glass breaking. She froze, listening to the echo die away. Then the sound of boots on the lane outside. Slow. Steady. Too heavy for anyone in the village. She didn't look. She didn't need to. The sound stopped right outside her door, and for a moment there was only silence. Then 3 knocks. Even. Polite. She held her breath, muscles aching from stillness. After a minute, the footsteps moved on. When she dared to open the door, there was no one there. Only a single coin face up. The date read 1731. Elias's last year alive. That night, the village square became a hunting ground. Martha didn't see it happen. No one did in the moment. But by morning the truth was written in the empty houses. The butcher's cottage. The Tregarn twins' flat above the bakery. Even old Mrs. Penpole, who hadn't left her bed in years. Gone. Doors still locked from the inside. Bed still warm. In every doorway, a single wet footprint and a coin. Some had dates from the 1700s, others from just before the war, as if time itself meant nothing to the tollkeeper. Those who remained began talking about leaving, but the fog was thicker on the roads leading out, and more than one car stalled before reaching the new motorway. The few who made it back into the village spoke of shapes moving in the mist, always just ahead, always the same pace as their car no matter how fast they drove. No one tried twice that Martha's own dreams shifted. Before, Elias had stood still, waiting for her to come to him. Now he moved. In one dream, she was in her kitchen again, but the walls had dissolved into fog. Elias walked toward her, each step making the ground sink like wet sand. She backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The fog pressed in from all sides, and the coins under her feet made it impossible to run. He reached for her, and when his gloved fingers brushed her cheek, her skin burned with cold so sharp it felt like it would crack. She woke screaming, heart hammering so hard she thought it would burst. The jar was on the floor beside her bed, coins spilled in a neat circle. She didn't remember bringing it upstairs. On the morning of the 27th, Martha decided to test something. She walked to the bridge in full daylight, carrying the jar of coins. The names on the stone seemed deeper now, the grooves darker, as if they'd been rubbed with ash. She set the jar down in the center of the bridge and stepped back, waiting. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the light dimmed, not like a cloud passing the sun, but as if the world had been pulled a little further from it. The jar tipped on its side. One coin rolled out, spinning in a tight circle before stopping at her feet. It was the newest one she'd ever seen, bright and clean, with the year 2023 stamped into its surface. This year. She left the jar where it was and walked away without looking back. That night, 3 more people vanished. By then, Blackwater felt like a photograph left too long in the sun. Faded around the edges, the center peeling away. The air smelled of damp copper. Every creak of a floorboard made people flinch. Every car engine starting was met with curtains twitching. Martha hadn't told anyone about the new coin from the bridge, but she kept it in her coat pocket, running her thumb over its perfect, factory-sharp edges whenever the silence grew too loud. The shopkeeper, Mr. Halley, had stopped speaking altogether, communicating only with nods. The only sound from the church was the wind banging the loose shutters. Even the seagulls had gone. It was as if the whole village was holding its breath, waiting for something that had already decided to arrive. The next night, she saw him again, not in a dream, but through her window. The fog had drawn close around the cottage, so thick she could barely see the hedge at the edge of her garden. Yet there he was, standing perfectly still among the swirls of mist, his hat brim low, his coat unmoving despite the breeze. This time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, faint but visible, were shapes, half-seen figures with blank faces, some tall, some child-sized, all swaying slightly as though underwater. Coins glimmered faintly where their eyes should have been. They didn't move closer, but they didn't fade away either. They just watched. The night of the 19th, she heard footsteps in her garden. Not quick, furtive steps, but slow, deliberate ones, pacing the gravel path. She peered through the curtains and saw nothing but white fog, thick enough to make the shapes of her apple trees look like stooped figures. Then 3 raps on the glass. Not loud, almost polite. She froze, every nerve in her body screaming not to move. Another 3 raps, evenly spaced. When she found the courage to flick on the porch light, the glass was empty. But there, on the windowsill, lay another coin. 1730 this time. And wet. Dripping, though the fog outside was dry. Paragraph 7 on the 20th. Martha decided she couldn't keep pretending nothing was happening. She drove to the bridge in daylight, hoping to find, she didn't even know what. Proof, maybe. Or a reason to pack a bag and leave Cornwall altogether. The river was swollen from overnight rain, the current whispering against the stones. Standing at the center of the hump, she ran her hand over the cold, damp parapet. That's when she noticed the marks. Not scratches. Not moss. Names. Dozens of them, carved into the stone in a shaky, deliberate hand. Each one followed by a date. 1731, 1781, 1831, 1881, and then 1931, 1981, and, etched more recently, 2021. The dates weren't exact, but the spacing was unmistakable. 50 years apart. And beneath the last one, in letters so fresh the stone dust still clung to the grooves, was her own name. Martha Penryn. No date. Not yet. Her breath caught, and the mist seemed to thicken around her, pressing in until the river's whisper became a voice. Not loud, not in her ear, but inside her head. Pay your toll. She stumbled back, heart hammering, and nearly fell as her foot slipped on the slick stone. The voice followed her all the way to the car, fading only when the bridge was a shrinking shadow in the rearview mirror. But that night, lying awake in the dark, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Elias Vane wasn't waiting for someone to cross his bridge anymore. He was coming to them. Part 2. It began with the dreams. Not just Martha's, though hers were vivid enough to stain her mornings with dread, but everywhere. The postmistress, Lorna, woke sobbing after seeing her dead father standing waist-deep in the Blackwater, calling her by her childhood nickname. Peter Smeeth, who ran the bait shop in Porthleven, dreamt of standing in line at the bridge while Elias Vane weighed each person with a glance, letting some pass and beckoning others into the fog. And every morning there was the same detail. Each dreamer woke with damp hair, as if they'd been standing in mist. Martha, for her part, dreamt of coins, dozens of them, rolling across her floor toward her feet, clinking in slow, steady rhythm until they piled high enough to bury her knees. She'd wake gasping, feeling their cold weight vanish even as she reached down to shove them away. By the third night, she stopped telling herself it was just her mind playing tricks. The village was infected now, not just with fear, but with a kind of restless waiting. The dogs barked at nothing. The cats disappeared altogether. Even the gulls seemed to have abandoned the place, their shrieking absent from the morning air. The 21st was a market day. The fog was lighter than it had been all week, and the square filled with stalls selling pasties, second-hand books, and the last of the season's apples. People talked louder than usual, as if the noise itself might keep something at bay. Martha told herself she should stay home, but after the sleepless night, she needed the presence of other human beings. She was halfway through buying a loaf from Mrs. Tregear when a sudden hush swept across the market, as visible as a shadow falling. Everyone's eyes turned toward the north road, the one leading to the bridge. A man was walking into the square, and though Martha didn't know him, she knew him. Tall, broad-shouldered, coat flaring in the breeze, a tricorn hat pulled low. His boots were wet to the ankle, dripping onto the cobbles. In one gloved hand, he held a small wooden box, the kind used for keeping coins. He walked without hurry, but every step seemed to swallow the space between him and the nearest stall. People backed away without speaking. Martha's stomach twisted into ice when he stopped beside her and tipped his head just enough for her to see his mouth curve into that impossible grin. Then he passed on, and the crowd swallowed him. When she turned to look again, he was gone, though the stones where he'd walked were still wet.